Welcome, and thanks for joining our webinar. Today, we have a captivating agenda that will address data loss preparedness, 3 real-life disaster recovery stories, and we'll also discuss how DRaaS works in the time of a crisis. I'm Trista Perot, Marketing Director for Global Data Vault, a data prize company, getting us started with a few housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. The webinar will run about 45 minutes, and then we'll follow with questions afterwards. While everyone is set to listen-only mode, we absolutely want to hear from you. I'll be monitoring chat as well as a couple of my colleagues, and we'll capture any questions to address at the end. I'll also be posting resources there as well in chat. The webinar is being recorded in case you love it so much and want to watch it again, or you have to leave early. You'll get a link after the session, or you can watch on our YouTube channel anytime or on our website. Quickly, before I start, let me set the stage for who we are. If you've known us as Global Data Vault, we are now a division of DataPrize, which is a managed IT service provider for mid-market businesses. We're providing leading IT solutions to organizations across the United States since 1995. DataPrize believes that unbeatable IT solutions and services are what allow our clients to be the best at what they do. And we look to deliver these across a range of offerings, including managed cybersecurity, managed user, 24/7 help desk, managed infrastructure, and so much more. DataPrize strives to be the end-to-end technology partner for our clients. And some of the folks in our audience know us as Global Data Vault. We are the BCDR division of DataPrize. We continue to be a Veeam Platinum cloud service provider, offering fully managed disaster recovery, backup as a service, Microsoft 365 backup solutions. You'll also be hearing a little about our proprietary technology called Enhanced Data Protection later in the discussion. We are specialists when it comes to Veeam, and we're proud to say that we have a deep expertise, including Veeam architects and a Veeam Vanguard on staff. And speaking of that special Veeam Vanguard, let me introduce our speakers. Today we have Stephen New, Operations Director for Global Data Vault and Veeam Vanguard, and Kelly Colwell, Senior Service Transition Manager for our parent company, DataPrize. Guys, we're going to talk about some nice saves today where you might tend to make this whole rescuing a company from data disaster look easy. But in reality, recovering from a data loss isn't always possible if companies aren't prepared. Can we just start off by talking about what key steps go into a successful disaster recovery before you spill the tea on some of your recent saves? I'm going to turn it over to you, Kelly.
All right. So disaster recovery really isn't fun, right? It's not something that anybody ever wants to have to go through, but unfortunately, a lot of businesses do. We've had discussions before about what to do to prepare for it, and we're going to sort of hit on those again. It's very important to do a business impact analysis. And basically what that does is it allows you to go through and look at your systems, look at your workflows, your applications, what really drives your business and allows your business to operate, and rate them by impact that they would have if there was an outage, if something happened to them. You can do that on a financial basis. If your services are unavailable to your customers or your employees, how does that look financially? Does it drive your customers to competitors? Does it decrease the reputation or brand of your business? Does it hurt your brand and your image for your employees? Do they feel uncertain about the ability of their employer to maintain a reliable workplace? So there's a lot of things to consider when you talk about this, and the business impact analysis is one of those. Very often thorough, time-consuming process will be well worth it in the end, and it should be part of every business continuity and disaster recovery plan, which Stephen's going to start taking us through.
Yeah, so one thing that you do need to have is a BCDR, business continuity disaster recovery plan. Also, in addition to that, you need to have a run book or a playbook on what to do during the business continuity disaster recovery plan. Another important thing is you need to know who your cyber insurance is and also how to contact them. Because cyber insurance is like any other insurance company. They want to come out and assess the damage. So if you have a car wreck, the first thing your insurance company is going to want you to do is call them. So if you get infected with malware, the first thing your insurance company is going to want you to do is call them. They are normally going to put a freeze on your internal environment so that they can go ahead and inspect the damage, find out what extent it is, what all's affected. And then at that point, while they're doing that, you need to go ahead and contact law enforcement to let them know that you had a a ransomware event, malware event, something malicious in your environment. You can actually report that to your local FBI field office, or you can actually go to cisa.gov to submit an online form. They also have an 888 number that you can call to report any of those ransomware, malware events immediately. Another thing that you need to do is you need to maintain hardware and software best practices. What that means is you need to make sure your versioning is patched, you're up to date on your software, you reboot your servers, any hardware upgrades, make sure that you have capacity, which is very important for your servers. A number one thing that we see whenever we bring customers up on our side is Windows updates. So we got to make sure that the servers are patched, they're rebooted, because just like if you reboot your computer locally, we have to wait for the Windows update process as well to get it online. That's something we can't interrupt. So just make sure your software is up to date, you're on the correct version, you patch your servers, you reboot them, all the housekeeping is in order. Another thing is you're going to need to test your backups. If you don't test it, you don't want to come into a DR event and find out that that server does not work, or this server, we can't get the application working, it needs a public IP address. You don't want to come into these issues during a DR event. So you need to test the issues and test the server, spin it up just as it is a real DR event, and make sure that you test all of your applications. Test them from a server level, test them from a workstation. So what I tell everybody whenever we perform DR tests for customers is you want to test it exactly as you're connecting to your VPN. The only difference is you're going to be connecting to our VPN or through your firewall that you put in one of our data centers. Connect to that, test everything just like you were to run it in production.
That's a really good point. And, that slide also talked about the availability gap. And we've determined over the years, we've learned, right, that the availability gap is about expectations versus reality. So it's basically what you think your systems, your applications, and your recoverability is versus what it really is, right? So how quickly can you get things up? How quickly can your services be delivered and returned to operations versus the reality of that? So we hope to get that as close to zero as possible. But we find a lot of times that customers are at risk because they have an availability gap that they didn't realize exists. And like Stephen mentioned, the testing of all of that can help you understand that a bit better and tweak anything that you need before an actual disaster. I think we're going to get into, the stories here. And unfortunately, all of these are true. There's nothing made up here, nothing embellished. And we have left the names and everybody off to protect the innocent, as it were, right? So these are actual calls that we've taken for customers been hit by some type of disaster, whether it's malware or natural disaster or, non-cyber type disaster, those types of things. So this particular company is 100 years old, been around forever. They have a good number of employees, and they were hit with Conti ransomware. And we didn't know that at first. So it was a normal day for us, and not for the person on call, but the on-call service started going off at 5 o'clock in the morning one day. And it turns out that customer had some weird things going on. And this particular one, I think they said that people weren't able to get on the internet. They were up and working early. The IT manager was still trying to get to work or something like that, but they weren't able to get on the internet. They started seeing some funny things on their systems. Somebody tried to log in remotely and was unable to. And that's when they really knew something really wrong was going on. So, Stephen, can you walk us through, from that time that we got the call, basically what we did to get them up and running?
Yeah, so I was actually involved in this recovery. So the customer did call us between 5:30 and 6 in the morning to let us know that they got hit by a threat. They weren't sure exactly what the threat was yet. So as soon as they called us, we went ahead and automatically engaged our spin up process for this customer and immediately started using their EDP or enhanced data protection to fast clone the data back into their repository. So the first thing that we do whenever you have a DR event is we disable your tenant. The reason for that is because we want to stop any activity that is happening on the cloud side. By disabling that tenant doesn't necessarily stop the deletions, but it stops any additional deletions. Keep in mind that this process happens within seconds. So by the time the customer called us, we went ahead and disabled their tenant, checked their repository. The data was already deleted by the ransomware. So at that point, we went ahead and initiated our DR spin up process. We went and fast cloned their servers back into the repository. And then once we did that, we did another fast clone to go ahead and begin the process of getting them up. So normally from the time that you call in until the time that we start spinning up is all automated. It's all done in the back end by proprietary technology that we have built to go ahead and get this done quickly as possible. So this is a 100-year-old award-winning service firm. They had 250 employees and they were hit by Conti ransomware. And I'm going to try my hardest not to call it Compi during this call. And they couldn't issue payroll. They basically called us and said, help, our employees are not getting paid tomorrow. We need your help. So what we did is we went ahead and spun them up, got them basically connected via the VPN. And then after we got them connected, it was determined that they needed external IP addresses to connect to an internal server to issue the payroll. So we went ahead and got that access, went ahead and did all the natting in the firewalls because we don't open everything. We only open what you tell us. So whenever you need an application that requires an external IP address, we will ask you what ports it required. This only required HTTP, HTTPS wasn't an issue. We opened those ports. We verified that they could access the server, but we had a very tight window during this recovery. We had to have payroll done by basically, I want to say like between 11 a.m. and noon. So we had a 3-hour window to recover this site, get it up, get it functioning, get the domain controllers communicating with everything. And then we did make the window and the employees got paid. But this is just one of the stories that we'll go through today. But it's extremely important that you communicate any needs like external IPs that you need prior to the DR event.
Yeah, so there were some interesting challenges with this one too, right? And Stephen and I were on the calls. We set up a bridge line and we were kind of taking shifts on it, but we were on one time together and we were talking to the point of contact and he was in a conference room. You could hear other people talking in the background and he kept saying like, hang on a second, the cybersecurity and the people, the lawyers, the investigators or somebody are here and they need to talk to me. So we'd have to go keep talking to various people around the office, either as employees or the cybersecurity folks or whoever they were. It's important to make sure that you've got the appropriate people lined up to have those conversations. If you are the director, the VP, or the CIO, or whoever it is, make sure that you have somebody designated to talk to us and somebody to handle your business. When you start confusing those lines, and this really goes for anything with business continuity and cyber response, make sure that you have your activities delegated and lined out appropriately so that everybody knows who's doing what and everything can be handled efficiently. This customer also had some rather large virtual hard drives, best practice outside of the norms. And we were able to recover them. Where that gave us a challenge was the time it took to get that data back down to the customer. So you fail over to GDV, spin up and everything happens. Well, we have to get all the data that changes back down to your systems, after you get them rebuilt or new systems in place or whatever it is. It took a really long time for us to get that data back to them because they had quite large hard drives that may have been out of a best practice measurement, right? So as you're designing your environment, make sure that you're taking that into consideration. How are those things set up and distributed? Because ultimately you may have to recover them. All right, what do we have next? Building fire. Now, you imagine you're asleep and your phone starts going off and it's not ransomware, it's not a hurricane, it's your building is literally burning down. That's pretty harsh. That would be a tough one to take. I mean, just imagine if you tried to go to the place where you worked. If you're one of the employees who wasn't on the call list and maybe you hadn't heard, you go to your place of work and there's just fire trucks everywhere and the building is, ash or, hopefully they got it put out, whatever. That would be pretty crazy to even deal with. And you see there that 40% of businesses do not reopen after a fire disaster. And that's true even more so for smaller businesses that may only have one location, fewer employees. They don't have the sustainability of some larger organizations. So this particular instance was a Midwestern manufacturing company, been around for a while. They did, their manufacturing was there in this building that caught fire. Their IT hub, so their data center, if you will, was in this building where they had the fire and it all got hit. So, Stephen, this was similar. It came in overnight, not by design. It's just, something shorted out or there was a fire. We don't know the exact details of it, but they called us with basically nowhere to go. The servers were inaccessible. They may have been melted. We don't know, right?
Yeah. So I'm just going to go ahead and just lay it out there. This customer's worst nightmare came true that day. They got that phone call 3 o'clock in the morning. One of their machines had an electrical issue, started a fire, burnt the entire building down, including all servers, computers, nothing was left. The customer called us about 6 a.m., letting us know they did have a fire. It destroyed their entire building, including their internal infrastructure. So our support team went into what they trained to do every day. They went ahead and spun the customer up, again, with our automated scripts that we run in the background, basically kicked off the process. We had this customer up within SLA. They never closed their doors. I mean, how impressive is that? Your building burns down. You rely on a BCDR company to get you up. We delivered. You didn't have to shut your doors one time. So whenever you do have a disaster in this nature, you have to understand that your equipment is gone. Your switches, your SANs, your servers, it doesn't exist anymore. So what we do on the BCDR team is we go ahead and spin it up into our infrastructure, provide you with VPN access, and then your customers would connect via the VPN to our infrastructure, and it's business as usual. So one thing that you have to remember is after the fire, after you locate a new building, after you get new equipment, then at that point, we work with the customer to get the data fed back into their new infrastructure. Because you have to understand, like I said before, there's no infrastructure, so you have to purchase all new equipment. So we went ahead and worked with this customer. So thankfully, we were able to get them up, get them filled back. And those 100 employees still have a job today because we were able to get them up and running. As you mentioned, 40% of businesses do not reopen after a fire or disaster. Luckily, we were there to help this customer get them up and going so that there was no impact to their business, and they continue to operate today.
This is something that businesses struggle with sometimes is how do I guarantee that I can keep my services running without having to maintain a second location? When you think of DR, old school thoughts of DR, right? I'm old. You'd have to have a second location. You'd have to have servers or very similar equipment in a second location. You'd either have to take backup tapes to that location and be prepared to do restores that way, which could take forever, assuming that they actually worked on tape. You'd have to maintain the cost of all that, plus keep it updated and patched and everything else. So the disaster recovery as a service and the cloud solution that we offer is a great alternative because it just folds into your OpEx costs of your business. You don't have to worry about anything from a hardware and software perspective at that point. All right. So the last one, unmitigated issues recovery. The old, I don't even know, so just something hiding in the shadows, right? This is where, patching comes really into play. Having some type of patch status, patch scanning, patch management from both an operating system and a cybersecurity level, something that's monitoring and checking for vulnerabilities that DataPrize offers with cybersecurity services. This customer was a residential home builder, got hit with a 0-day exchange exploit. It's just a Windows issue, right? Or I'm sorry, Microsoft issue that found a fatal flaw in Exchange that allowed somebody to compromise their systems. And I think it came out in March, and the customer tried to remediate it. They thought they'd remediate it, but they really hadn't. And so this hole existed for 6 months, I think, before it came to light in the form of ransomware. Same type of thing happened, right? They went to work, stuff was going wrong on the systems. And so we see this a lot. When these things attack your systems, they go in and they try to disable, keep you from doing anything, right? They'll encrypt your backups if they can. If they can't, they'll delete them. They will change passwords wherever they can. They'll start locking down your DNS, your DHCP. They'll block access to firewalls. If you have the right creds, you can do anything in an environment with PowerShell. This customer, again, wasn't able to get on the internet. They couldn't log into their VMware servers or their Hyper-V servers, And when they started making phone calls. And so, again, it was 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. This one was a little bit later. we get a call, hey, we think something's going on, we've been hit. And Stephen and the team, did the same thing, disabled the tenant. And Stephen, you want to run them through the process again?
Yeah, so they called us between 5, 7 in the morning, let us know they were attacked. This customer, I believe, didn't know what they were hit by. So we went ahead and started the same process. We went ahead and kicked off our proprietary script in the background that runs. As soon as you call in, we disable the tenant, we run that process, automatically clones your data. And then once that's done, it kicks off the automated build process, which brings your servers up into an instant recovery state, or what you might hear us say, IR. And then we go ahead and put them in your own VPN that's assigned to you. You're the only customer on that, and then you access the server. So one thing that we do have to point out is when we bring these servers up, keep in mind these attacks lay dormant. So one thing that we do recommend is to scan your servers. Don't want to go into the woods on this too much, but we had one customer who did scan it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but they did find additional threats on their system by running a virus scan or a scan to detect additional stuff. And they were cleaning stuff off in our environment. So you have to try to remediate the virus after we bring them up online, and then just make sure that there's nothing dirty on the systems before we provide internet access. Because as soon as we flip on the internet, that's a trigger. These things normally go out and check ping servers to verify you have internet. And as soon as you have internet, as soon as it pings a server, gets a reply, your DR environment just got encrypted. Now, good thing for the business continuity disaster recovery team, it's fairly easy for us to just kick off that script again, reclone your data, and not turn the internet on. So this customer didn't actually remove everything from their system, and it detected the internet and it triggered. They trigger sometimes by a certain date, certain events. It triggered, and they were losing millions of dollars every day. Not just, $100,000 here, millions of dollars. So we had to get this customer restored as quickly as possible to stop that number from keep counting up, because the longer they're down, the higher that number goes. And we understand that. So our goal is to get you up as quickly as we possibly can to stop that ticker from counting up.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this customer faced a few more challenges than we expected, right? So we had them up and running, per SLA pretty much. There were some issues with the versioning of so they had 3 antiviruses running on their systems, which is generally not good, right? The more is not better. And so this goes back to have a better DR experience if you must have one is, use the best antivirus you can. Don't use multiple ones. So use something with active script blocking and some other things like that. Use something to help with that. But every time we'd spin the servers up, and all 3 antiviruses would sit there and fight with each other and try to scan because they knew something was wrong. And it took a while for us to be able to get into the systems and make them stop. Once we were able to get past that hurdle, we had internet bandwidth issues to the customer, had some people moving servers around trying to improve that. Meanwhile, they were trying to rebuild their systems on a completely new operating system and kind of do an upgrade at the same time. So it wasn't the best scenario, but we still delivered the product, and we learned a lot in the meantime about how to improve customer experience and what not to do, what to do, et cetera, those things, so that we can offer experiences like this and say, don't use multiple antiviruses on your servers. It can actually really harm you. So, over here's a little information blurb about 0-day vulnerabilities. This is something that you just really need to watch out for in general, and make sure, I mentioned that patching processes. Make sure you've got that in place. Make sure that you are keeping track of your 0-day vulnerabilities, your critical vulnerabilities, and patching those and rebooting your servers as quickly as you can, because the hackers know they're there and they're going to use them, right? And like Steven said, they can drop time bombs in your system to where they get in the first week or two. And if it takes you a month to patch those, they may have a time bomb, a malware package sitting there for 3, 4, 6 months until someday it goes off. And by that point, everything, it's quietly made its way around your network. We see that all the time. If you've heard of, AI powered detection, where it goes out and it says, okay, this is Steven New's activity. As an antivirus or anti-whatever prevention, I have learned what Steven New's typical activity looks like. And so his behavior on a day-to-day basis is known to me, and I'm not going to stop it. So this malware will sit there and it'll start looking like a person by design, and it'll just quit, it'll just start creeping out to where everything that's happening becomes the normal. So when it does its damage and it deploys itself, nothing is stopped because it's seen as normal activity. Again, I'm not making this up. This didn't necessarily happen to this customer, but it is a real world scenario that you need good cyber protection and something like enhanced data protection to protect you from. So hopefully we haven't scared you too much. These are, again, real world scenarios that we deal with on a weekly basis to help customers out. So Stephen, it's not if, it's when, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just as you said, it's not if, it's when. Keep in mind, these people, this is their career. So whenever they go through and they hack your systems, again, we're not trying to scare you. We're only telling you the truth. So from what we see. So these people have a career in hacking. That is their job. Their job is to steal your information, sell it on the dark web, and get paid for that. So we need to make sure that, all your software is up to date. I mean, we need to make sure that you're patched. Some of these events could have been prevented, but by just a simple software update, a simple Microsoft security update. But yeah, I mean, 70% of organizations had one ransomware attack last year. That's a high number. I mean, you would expect that number to be, 50%, but that's 76%.
Yeah, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but they say, so many thousands of cyber attack attempts happen every hour or maybe even every minute. I don't know, because they're just bots out on the internet going and looking for holes and everything. And when they find it, they'll insert themselves automatically.
Yeah. So also 36% of data on average was unrecoverable after a ransomware attack. So whenever they encrypt your data, they want you to pay them for a decryption key to decrypt your data. Like I said, this is their career. That's how they get paid. If you don't pay them, they're not eating dinner that day. So their goal is to make you pay them. Keep in mind that when you do pay them, you are now a target. You might as well just have a target on your back and walk around the streets, because they think, we've said this before, they think you are now their ATM. If they need money, they're coming to you. And we have actually spun somebody up before, restored them back into their infrastructure. The customer did not clean their environment. They got hit 2 weeks later. The same people re-encrypted their data and wanted them to pay again. So the people you're dealing with are not Boy Scouts. They are criminals that are going to get money out of you any way they can. I mean, even if they say they won't encrypt your data again, do not believe them. We suggest that you do not pay the ransom, because you are now a target.
Well, and then, the government's now potentially sanctioning people for actually paying the ransom because it enables and funds people. There was a group out of Russia, Evil Corp, I think was the name, and they did the whole WannaCry virus, but they're really popular in a bad way. And the government has been laying sanctions down to companies that actually pay the ransom to them because they're trying to prevent that. So, it's up to you whether you make the decision to pay the ransom, but if you do, you might get your data back. You may have the feds come knocking for another reason. And then also, they could just come back and decide to take your money again. So the best solution there is to have a better defense, so, a disaster recovery solution that has a protection method like enhanced data protection, which I think is on the next slide. After the DR event, what do we do? So you've got to take stock, right? And when we say after the DR event, there's two parts to that. There's immediately after we do the failover, immediately after you discover that a disaster has happened. And then there's after the entire event and everything is back to running the way it was. So what we typically see is the customers have their backup server joined to a domain. These malware, ransomware scripts and agents will grab domain admin credentials out of somebody's browser, right? So as a domain administrator or a systems administrator, you may log into a system on your network with domain admin credentials. You may then use that browser to go out onto the web, go to some site that has malicious code on it, and suddenly your domain admin credentials get scraped. That script now knows where you came from, can reverse and follow you back through your IP address, go into your systems and start doing whatever it wants to with those credentials. So knowing that it will try to encrypt your backups, Veeam encrypts your backups by default. So since it can't encrypt them, it just deletes them. Since it has your Windows backup server was joined to a Windows domain and it has domain admin credentials, it can do that, right? It can access your cloud backups and delete those as well. So you have to start assessing the damage. Like, how do I recover? What exactly has been affected? Is it all my systems? Is it servers, is it workstations? Is it multiple locations? Like Steven said a little bit ago, this happens very, very quickly. It's when you hear about people like ripping plugs out of the wall, that's almost what you have to do to stop this from spreading. And by that point, it's probably too late anyway. So, Steven, once we've failed over, can you talk us through the failback and what that kind of takes?
Yeah. So first of all, you're going to need to make sure that you have a clean environment to fail back into, because the one thing that you do not want to happen is you schedule the downtime, you work with our team to get you failed back, and you find out, hey, I left this workstation up and it was still infected and it just reinfected my entire environment. So you need to, first of all, create an inventory of everything in your environment, and you need to make sure that everything is cleaned, even if you have to re-image it. Once everything is clean, then we need to plan the failback. So the failbacks are normally planned. What we suggest is you create a window starting at 5 p.m. on a Friday until 8 a.m. Monday morning. And then what we'll do is we'll actually, when you have a DR event, we follow all of Veeam's best practices, including the 3-2-1 rule. So whenever you spin your servers up here, we back them up into one of our DR backup servers. And then what we do is we actually make you the cloud tenant and we send the backups back down to you. And then you need to schedule time or a failover window to fail back into your production. So like I said, normally 5 p.m. Friday, 8 a.m. Monday, we'll do a final backup here. We'll sync those changes back down to you. And then you restore your VMs into Monday morning. Once we schedule this failback window, we normally don't flip the switch back on to turn your site back on, because then we would have to reschedule it. We first of all need to make sure you have a clean environment. Nothing's going to reinfect the servers we have on our side. Then we're going to need to plan the failback into your infrastructure. And one of the most important things is you need to make sure that you have licensing for your new equipment or licensing for your existing equipment, so that we have the ability to fail you back, make sure everything comes up like normal and everything's working. So after we fail you back, we're going to make sure that your servers are functioning like they're supposed to. And then at that point, we'll go ahead and start the backups again.
Yeah, and it's important to think outside the box and on a broad scale, because if you think of all your employees and all your devices, you could rebuild everything that you have in your building, right? If you have one building, everything's there. You rebuild your servers, you rebuild desktops and things that are there. Here comes Trista with her laptop, hasn't been to the office in a couple of weeks. She works remote, or it's the pandemic or whatever. And she brings this laptop that's still infected because it hasn't been updated, doesn't have new antivirus on it. It hasn't been scanned or cleaned, and it hasn't been rebuilt. She drops that thing back on your network, and guess what happens? Steven gets a call at 5 o'clock in the morning again saying we need to spin everything back up in the DR because the whole thing got infected. So make sure that you're thinking about everything and anything that could potentially touch your environment. So the last thing is the after action report. This is mainly for customers, for end users, and maybe folks that they work with, right? The DataPrize cybersecurity services that we offer, we do have incident response, and it helps with assessments, after the fact. But basically you go through and identify where you think the situation started. What was the ingress point? What was affected first? How was it infected? Was it a 0-day vulnerability? Was it some other patch? You may have an idea about some of those things by this point, and then you create the assessment. A lot of times the law enforcement or your cybersecurity insurance people will want that. You may need to file it for those insurance reasons. You may need it for audit, etc. So if you need help with those types of things, we can certainly help you with that. But it's important to make sure you do an assessment, kind of a formal lessons learned, make sure that those things aren't allowed to happen again, and you have better control over your environment. So yay, now here's EDP. So one of the things that our friend over at Veeam, Jason Buffington, at JBuff on Twitter, I believe, shout out, one of his sayings is, why BAS when you can DRaaS, right? So backup as a service, DR as a service, why BAS when you can DRaaS? They're very similar technologies. You're already sending data to the cloud for backup as a service. Why would you do that if you don't have the ability to spin those systems up? The spin up part is the key, as we've discussed here today, and it shouldn't be overlooked. When you talk about backup as a service only, you're limited to backing up, sending your backups. If you have to restore, if you have an outage, you must download all of that data first. You got to pull it back down to some system, and then you have to restore it. So your outage window goes from an hour or a couple hours into days or weeks potentially, right? It depends on the internet, it depends on the systems that you have available, et cetera. So as much as I love it, I'm going to let Stephen talk about enhanced data protection. We have a little graphic over here that sort of outlines what a perimeter from the backup server in our cloud area looks like. So can you walk us through this, Stephen?
Yeah, so basically the EDP data, or enhanced data protection is what we call it, is a copy that is outside of your repository that you do not have access to. The reason why you do not have access to it is because if you can get to it, malware or viruses or ransomware can get to it. So we do not provide you with access to this data. So whenever the data is cloned for 5 days, we keep it in a near gapped repository. And then whenever you do your test, we always spin you up from your EDP data. The reason for that is because we get you a test and we test your EDP data, which in a ransomware or a security event, that has saved our customers' businesses more than once. Probably about 10 to 20 times, customers' data was gone. So EDP has been a lifesaver and for our customers and their businesses. So we don't provide you access. When we test from your EDP data to verify functionality. So just know that whenever you do request a test, 90% of the time, it's going to be from your EDP data. You should also be able to log into your quality portal and or your status emails to verify if you have EDP. If you do not have EDP, please reach out to your sales rep to get that added today.
Yeah, we can do that really easily for you. The other thing to consider, everything is great from this perspective, but what if nobody's watching the monitors and the screens and the control gauges and all that? So a lot of times this activity can be detected if you're using the appropriate systems. If you're using intelligent log gathering and log parsing, you have the correct antivirus in place, you have the procedures and the team in place. And when we talk about as a service, not everybody has the ability to staff cybersecurity experts. We have some very good ones, and we do work 24/7. So if you've got cybersecurity incidents happening in the middle of the night, we can be there to alert you for that. And that's very important in the whole scheme of things, right? So we talked about patching. Regular checkups, both on the cybersecurity and the DRaaS level, are important. It kind of goes in line with testing. Stephen talked about testing your backups, testing your DR spin-ups. You just kind of want to give your environment a checkup. Look through everything, look through your settings, make sure that your current systems and technologies are up to scale with what's going on in the world today. What got you here won't get you there, right? The stuff that we design for and design against to protect against today may be obsolete a year from now. Cyber technology and the bad actors get more and more creative. So we constantly have to improve not only our cybersecurity practices, but your disaster recovery practices. Make sure your business impact analysis is up to date, your call trees, et cetera. You just don't ever want to get behind the 8 ball on things like this and find out in the middle of a disaster while your building's burning down that you don't know who's supposed to have called the backup, your disaster recovery company. Make sure you're keeping your DRaaS provider updated changes as well. Anything else you want to highlight here, Stephen?
The only thing I could really highlight is the importance of security as a service and a 24-hour SOC. I mean, if you get something malicious on your servers, you want somebody there to monitor your systems via the SIM programs to catch these bad actors, to catch these bad login attempts. Call you immediately on your cell phone if they do detect something, which not only is business continuity and disaster recovery a good investment, but it also pairs well with security as a service. I mean, you want to stop them from getting into your systems in the first place before they can do something malicious. So I would reach out to your sales reps to see if to work out with them and get Data Prize's security team involved and see if we can't get you a good solution if you don't already have one in place.
All right. Well, I'm tired of talking. Does anybody have any questions?
We do have a question, but I have one first. Why do you think that the marketing person is going to be the one who reinfects the system?
Next question.
I noticed you threw me under the bus there.
Next question.
For the record, I've not done that. Okay, we do have a question, 2-part question. First part, how would you help a client that has no servers on site?
So cloud-based, or there's a couple of different options there. We do absolutely offer public cloud protection. If you've got everything based in a cloud, we still follow the 3-2-1 rule. If you're using Azure, let's say Azure Virtual Desktops or Azure servers, and all of your data is stored in Azure, if there's some kind of an outage with Azure, it happens. You've just lost access to your backups and your production data. So we do offer protection that way as well, and we can restore that data back into a cloud, into another cloud, on premises, physical, whatever your needs are that way. What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is, what's the minimum user requirement for your SOC service?
That's a great question. We will have to follow up with you on that. I'm not sure there's a minimum, but yeah, we'll definitely get in touch with you and get you the information about that. I really don't think that there's a minimum to it.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap for today. We so appreciate everyone for joining us. You can find our previous webinars and, of course, register to be notified of future webinars at globaldatavault.com/webinars. Follow us on any of our social channels as Global Data Vault. Thank you again.